Welcome, Joanne Leedom-Ackerman, to talk about her latest novel, Burning Distance. Hi, Joanne.
Hey, Doris.
Well, all right, Joanne. Burning Distance combines love, a love story, and contemporary history, and a thriller. And it's about the dark world of arms trafficking. Is that a good description?
That encompasses certainly most of the book.
Okay. All right. Tell us a little bit about your main characters, Lizzie and Adele, their family backgrounds.
First of all, the book begins with a prologue. So you really meet Lizzie at about 19. But the real opening of the book, chapter 1, begins when Lizzie's in high school. And before that, chronologically, she was 10 years old, and she gets a phone call that she rushes in to answer because nobody's in the house. And a man tells her to get a message to her father that they've sanded his gas tank, and her father's plane crashes in the Persian Gulf. She doesn't really understand what happened. Nobody explains it to her. Her mother moves the family to London, and Lizzie and her two sisters are enrolled in the American school in London. And it's a time of, great change. The Berlin Wall has fallen. The Soviet Union is breaking apart. It's sort of an exciting time. And the American school in London, where actually both of my sons went, is full of an international student population. And in London, when she's a junior in high school, you have to read the opening chapter, but she meets a young Palestinian Lebanese senior. She's a junior, and they become partners in a chemistry lab, and then they fall in love. And so that's the setup for the book. And the book is really about this complex outside world that's going on with the children in a school that are connected to it, even though, they're connected to what teenagers are connected to and everything, but their parents and the friends of their parents are connected to a much larger world. And it turns out it includes her stepfather and her father and his father. And in the background is the whole arms trading, arms trafficking, middlemen, and diplomats and what's going on. And then the book builds to a major world event. I don't want to give away the book.
Okay, yes. No, we don't want you to do that. And so it takes place before and after the Gulf War, is it?
It does. And the people ask me the genesis, and I've been writing this book for so long because I began it actually when I lived in London. And as I tell people, had it been published right when I wrote it, it would have been very prescient because it foreshadowed a lot that was to come. But as many writers know, your book doesn't instantly get published. So I went on to write another novel and then went back to rewrite this one, and then wrote another novel and went back to rewrite this one. So this one now is coming out, and instead of being prescient on history, it is more historical fiction. But that's okay.
Well, but you see, I think that's okay because it relates really to the world today as well. I mean, I think it parallels America's own escalating problems with gun trafficking. As a matter of fact, I read that the AFT reports more than 600,000 crime guns traced in the last 2 years across state lines. Do you see any slowing of that problem, or are we just going to have to live?
I'm not that prescient. Maybe my next novel, the imagination, the characters will start telling me. This is set largely on an international scene with the arms trafficking and the escalation of that began in the Middle East, really in the 70s, when America started having very large oil debts because of the oil crises. And America and Europeans began selling a lot of arms and balancing that. And in fact, what's interesting is that a huge number of the weapons of mass destruction, the components for those that we went to war with to rid from Saddam Hussein, Europe and America sold into the markets there. When Iran and Iraq had a war together, many people said, "Oh, well, let them fight each other," and the arms dealers sold into both markets.
Yes.
But for the genesis of the book, the very beginning, I think, was invaded Kuwait the summer of 1990, and my youngest son, who was even at 10 years old, was very savvy politically. His best friend, one of them, was the son of the Kuwaiti ambassador, and the other was an Iraqi student. So when we picked him up from summer camp and said, Elliot, this happened over the summer, and his first response was, well, "What happens to Talal and Alex?" he instantly saw, the ramifications of that to his friends.
Right.
Well, from then on, when his friend Talal visited, there were 2 bodyguards outside our house. And Alex, the Iraqi student, never came back to the American school. So I became interested in what this effect was on the students. And so the real human story here are these young students growing up. And the book spans 15 years. So, it's...
I was just going to ask you, that it seems to me that the book, which I loved reading, is also not just about the trafficking, but the impact of the war and the trafficking on families, and on Lizzie in particular.
Well, and it's also, I think a novel should be, is about the hearts of the characters. And these are 2 young people trying to cross bridges that, history and family have, and it has really pulled apart. And these 2 young people fall in love. So somebody's described it like Romeo and Juliet with a background of arms trafficking. So, but in a way, it's true, because the hearts of the young people, there are all kinds of barriers, but they see the humanity in each other and love each other and want to build a different world. They don't want to have the world that their parents are handing them necessarily, even though, they love their parents, but they can see beyond that. And so it really is their struggle to find out what that means. And is it even possible? And that is a dilemma in the book. And there's some big choices. There's choices they have to make.
This book has been in your head for what, 20 years or so?
At least. I have, Doris, you appreciate this as a writer and editor, but you carry various stories in your head, but when I put it in a drawer, I started another book, which is coming out next year at this time.
Great. Congratulations.
And then the publisher has an option on a 3rd book, which is written. So you carry these stories and they all sort of talk to each other and, inform each other. And really for me, it was an education in the field in the Middle East. And I took Arabic lessons. I really sort of went and lived in part of the region. And so it was an education for me in that,
I think the research that you did does come through in the book. What was the most difficult thing about writing this book? Because you already have like 6 novels and a lot of anthologies and also nonfiction books out there. But what was different about this book for you?
One of the difficult component, this book is highly, highly researched. I have notebooks like this high of news clipping, but it also was researched expansive internet. So, I literally had the news clippings, I had the papers and I clipped them and, all of the things we used to do in a newsroom.
Right.
And I know, the news library. So I have notebooks of that. And I've read books after books. The bibliography is quite long, just to understand the context that I was writing in. And so the difficult part for me was to take all this language of weapons and, chemical weapons and polyprothenes and anti-ballistic missiles, and then somehow translate this into literary language and a piece of literature. Yeah. So I felt like I was literally digesting draft after draft, these, components to knead out, the real heart of it, because the journalist in me wanted to get the facts right. But, I've been writing long enough to know that the journalist isn't really the person who writes the story. It's got to be the novelist who's focused on the hearts of the characters.
That's very well said. How did you come up with the title and what does that mean?
Oh, well, the title is, this book went through lots of titles. So the title is revealed at the very end, and it's really the distance you have to keep from the sun to keep from burning up. So there's an Icarus reference in it, and there's a reference that's directly about the father. So it's, you get close to something, but you have to know, you have to know how to keep your distance.
Yes, that's good advice. How many times do you rewrite? How many times do you rewrite your novels, and what's your schedule like?
Well, I used to teach, and among what I taught was novel writing and fiction. And my students would often ask me, how do I know when I'm done? And my answer was always, when you're published. You're not done until you're published. Because frankly, any writer will tell you, you can always see something better to do. You can always usually see how to tweak it or rearrange it. And if you go and you do more work, you grow as a writer. And so you see new things. So I have no formula of how many drafts I do, but until I'm published, I consider it out there and live, ready for me to go back and rethink something big or something small. My schedule is, I try to write, though, as a book's coming out, I can't say I'm doing that so much because I'm more on the, promotional end of it, which is a part of MFA programs that they needed to give more to students of the promotion of your work, because writing it, unfortunately, is just not all of it. But I try to write every day. And depending on the outline of the day, because I do other work, it can be a beautiful day is when I can write 6 hours or 7 hours. I mean, that's my heavenly day. It doesn't work, but I do write every day, and it just keeps me going. It's sort of the fuel of my imagination, and it's how the world talks to me. It's how I plug in.
Have you ever become discouraged over the tough road to publishing, and what kept you going?
I think the writing itself kept me going. There was a time, and I can't, I can no longer remember an event per se, but there was a time when, for lack of a better metaphor, the monkey got off my shoulder and said, look, you love doing this. Just be grateful you're able to do something you love, and hopefully the universe will connect with it. But you love it. And most writers, artists will tell you that. Musicians make music, whether they're performing or not. Painters paint. If they're lucky, there's a gallery that will take them and people will be part of them. But you do it because you love it and feel it. I have a my youngest son became a novelist over time and done very well. But I remember saying at an early stage in his writing, because I thought he was very good. I said, look, I don't know how successful you'll be. I don't know if you'll be widely published, acclaimed or not. But the only thing I can assure you is that will not fill you up. Now, if you love writing, go for it. all the other, even if you're acclaimed or not acclaimed, that's really not the reason to do it. Because if you love because the writing, it feeds you, it feeds your soul, it connects you with people, it lets you see things you wouldn't see if you weren't bringing them into words, if words is your medium. I'm sure musicians would say the same about music, and, artists will say the same about their art form. Dancers will say the same. It's the way you create and connect with, the way you're supposed to connect with the universe.
I like that phrase. Lizzie says there are moments in life when reality turns on a thin line and never looks the same again. Wow. Where did that come from?
I think just watching how life is. There are a few major things that happen, and suddenly you just see it. You say, oh my gosh, okay. I missed that, but okay. I see that, and there are a few of those moments in the book, both for Lizzie and for Otto, the main character.
You've been vice president of the Worldwide Writers Organization, PEN International, and you travel to the world. How has the PEN experience helped inform your novels and your career?
Oh, well, it's, there's not an easy answer for that, except that I've been so blessed to have this family of writers around the world that we just consider each other family. I mean, and there are very few countries that I would go to that I couldn't find somebody that I knew. And my journey began when I moved from New York to Los Angeles, and I had a 4-month-old baby, and I was teaching at Occidental College, and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know any writers. And so I went to a dinner at Penn, and I found out, and I was asked to go write some postcards for a writer who was in prison in China. And I found that so interesting. One, it touched my soul, because I really, from a very young age, was working on behalf of, individuals that I didn't think were getting a fair shake. And Penn did that. So I began imagining this writer in China who actually 20 years later I actually met. He got out of prison. And then I was time passed and I was elected the president of the center. There were two centers in the U.S. back then. One was in Los Angeles, and I was elected the president. It happened to be the year of the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, and also happened to be the year of Tiananmen Square. So it was a very busy year for Penn internationally. And Penn has 150 centers around the world in over 100 countries. So and it's a very grassroots organization of writers. So when it mobilizes and its voice mobilizes, you have a pretty big megaphone out there. And so I was part of that. And in LA, we did a lot. We connected with a lot. And then the next year our family moved to London, and that's where Penn is headquartered. And because I had gotten to know so many people and worked with them, a few years later, they asked me to run the human rights work of Penn as chair of the Writers in Prison Committee. And I did that for 4 years.
That's awesome.
Then I moved back to the US. And then a few years later, it's a complicated story. It's in a book of mine called Penn Journeys.
Yes.
But a few years later, I was asked to sort of be the international secretary, which is essentially the person at that time who ran the organization. We've changed our structure and all, but back then, that was handed to me. And that was a lot of fun. It was exhausting. But just so many people I got to know and meet in every continent. And, informs my writing because I just, I see humanity out there. And the nice thing about the organization is it's writers who are working for writers. They're not trying to advance their own work. They're really there because there are a lot of writers in countries get put in prison if they try to write what they see. And Penn works on their behalf.
Yes. Well, back to your writing. How many rejections have you had? And
of course, I can't even count. I have no idea. I quit counting a while ago.
Okay, because every writer has those, or every successful writer has those. I'll
just add. I can remember once hearing Michael Cunningham, who is a wonderful writer who wrote The Hours, among other books, saying it in some talk. Said, every writer has one thing in common: rejection.
I love that.
The other statement I loved it from John Steinbeck when in his early career, and he was getting rejections, and he wrote to his agent Pascal Covici and said, "Well, at least one more person has read my book." So I don't think there's a writer I know who hasn't had rejections.
So, how has your journey been with Ocean View Publishing? What's that been like?
My agent found the publishers, and they publish in large part in the thriller and mystery market. That's their main market. And my book, part of the challenge earlier in publishing is that people say, well, it's a love story, but it's also a thriller and it's also a mystery. What is it? And I'd say it's a novel. Can it be
right?
But God bless them if they want to publish it and market it as a thriller. I'm happy, and I've been very happy with the production quality of the book. The book itself.
Yes.
The book itself is a beautiful book. The quality of the other books they published are really quite high, very, very fine writers. I've read numbers of them, and I'm very pleased with that. It's a smaller press, so you had to get your engine going to help get the book out there, and they really want the writers to be engaged on social media as part of promoting it. So I've learned a lot about social media in the last year. But it's a pleasure. The people I'm working with are a pleasure to work with.
Okay, and by the way, who's your agent?
Annalise Spitzer. She, her father had an agency called Philip Spitzer Literary Agency, and Annalise before that was the vice president of at Knopf for marketing.
Okay, that's a real good following. Yes. Do you have any advice for writers who are struggling to break into publishing?
Keep your eye on the writing. Don't forget that that's what you're doing. Make sure you're reading, and don't give up your day job. I used to teach a course at UCLA called "I'm Writing the First Novel." It's through the extension, and I can remember one session, I came there like 12, and everybody already had at least one degree, if not a graduate degree, and were engaged. And there were there was a man who came and said, I sold my business to take your course. And I went, oh my gosh, please go get your business.
Oh, yeah, go get it back.
Go get it back. Don't get divorces. Don't do anything to change the stability in your life right now. All the support system you can get. So make sure you have a support system around you, and if it's income or family or whatever, because it can be a long journey, but love the work, stay with it because you love it, and listen and be persistent, and read and get to know other writers. Writers are very generous to each other because we all know how hard it is. So
yeah, it's
they're your friends.
It's a hard game. What are you working on next?
Well, I have this other novel coming out called The Far Side of the Desert that comes out next March. And because I kept writing, I have another novel after that I have to submit and see if they take, called Washington Days, Beirut Nights. And then I have a novel I've just given to my agent. We haven't talked about it yet. That could be part of a sequel, but at the moment it's called Front Porch Mysteries. And it's shorter. It's like, 50, between 50 and 60,000 words, but it could be mystery. And it's probably a quick adult read or a young adult read. I'm not sure where it goes, but it's fun. It's several multi-generation with a grandmother and her grandchildren and the children in between, and some mysteries that are happening. And it's set in the US, but with history as a background. That's
awesome. One more question. What would you like readers to take away from Burning Distance?
It's a good question. Each reader will take away something of their own. So I don't know what, to me, what I took away from it was how the importance of building bridges and seeing the humanity, the universal humanity in cultures, in people, and how we find that and cement that and then grow that. And, that I think is something that certainly in our country, of the US, we are wrestling with, and hope we don't lose sight of the fact that ultimately we are all human beings. We're not, this religion, this race, this gender, this slice of everything, but we are, a human family. And how do we find the bridges between each other and acknowledge and respect the individualism that we all have? And I think that's what these characters have both wrestled with and have to wrestle with as they go forward.
That's beautiful. Okay, well, Joanne Leedom-Ackerman, author of Burning Distance, just out from Ocean View Publishing. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Doris. Nice to see you. Bye.